We are fearfully and wonderfully made. Before we were born, you knew us. You know our deepest thoughts, our fiercest passions, our desperate longings, our ancient hurts, our wildest dreams, our strongest fears. We are fearfully and wonderfully made. When we were being shaped and formed in the secrets of our mother's wombs, you also knit together in us strong threads of liberation and justice, will and grace, and set us free to live our lives as human beings fully alive. We, you and me, are fearfully and wonderfully made.
Good morning and welcome to Church at Belong. I am Genevieve Rohret-Navin and I'm one of your pastors here at Belong, and I'm so grateful to be with you all. just wanted to point out that this week we have some great opportunities for community. We have Tuesday night, our second session of Ghosts in the Schoolyard. We'll be talking about the second half of the book. And even if you weren't able to come to the first session, no worries, you're more than welcome to join in. Wednesday night, we have our fourth session for self-care, and this is going to be on calming and meditative skills. And it's not too late to sign up for either of those, so check out the newsletter or the website or Facebook to sign up. The other part of our announcement this morning is that we are going to be talking about abortion and reproductive justice this morning. We're going to be having someone share their story in a few moments, and the sermon will be on this topic as well. If this is not something that you want to share with young ears and eyes this morning, we wanted to give you a heads up so that you would be able to make that decision that's right for your family. So as we move into our story time, I'm honored to share with you a story that one of mine and Pastor Jasper's good friends, Emily Fleming, is sharing with us. She is a pastor here in our United Methodist Conference, the Mountain Sky Conference. She is courageous, and I am proud to call her a friend, and happy that she will be able to share part of her story with us today. So we'll move into that now.
All right. Emily, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing a little bit about your story this morning. I've introduced you just a few moments ago, but I'd love for you to tell us just a little bit about you and get us started.
Sure. I just wanted to start out by saying thank you so much for the invitation. This is actually the first time I will speak about this story from the pulpit. I have been an ordained minister in the United Methodist Church for 7 years, and for 8 years before that served as a lay pastor in the Methodist Church in Germany. So I have a lot of different experiences and have told my story many times to people one-on-one, but never in a format like this where I can't see their faces, where I don't know who's judging me and who's not judging me, whose heart I might be breaking because they've always wanted a child and aren't able to have one, or because they are adopted and really grateful to be alive. I've heard all kinds of responses to my story, so I'm a little anxious to talk with you about this topic, but I think it's very, very important, and I'm so glad you guys are tackling the issue today.
Yeah. And so what can you tell us a little bit about why you feel like it is important to share your story and have space to do that?
Absolutely. So I was raised in the South, in the southeastern part of the U.S., in a very conservative denomination. And as a child, I knew what was black and what was white, what was right, what was wrong. Everything was good or evil, and it kind of fit into this binary, dualistic way of thinking. And abortion was one of those issues. I had a table in 7th grade out in front of our cafeteria set up that was saying, abortion is a sin, and we should tell your parents to vote against abortion because it's wrong, and babies have a right to life, and all the kind of normal arguments that you still hear today from certain people in our society. And then I went through my own personal experience, and it really forced me to ask some tough questions and to realize that not everything in life is that simple or that dualistic or that binary. So I had to make some really hard decisions, and it changed the way that I think, and it changed the way that I think about other people. I became much less judgmental when I realized that things aren't that simple and clear, and that every situation is different. And so I'm happy to share a little bit of my story. I don't want to overwhelm, but
Yeah.
sure. When I was in 8th grade, I fell in love, and I dated the same boy for 5 years. And after 2.5 years, I was 16 and a half years old, and I was ready to have sex. And I went to a church that said that was a sin and I was going to go to hell if I did that. It was also a church that didn't believe in drinking or dancing. So, and I just broke with the church. I did the brave thing. I went to my mom. I said, I don't believe this is right. I'm ready to have sex. I want to go and get on the birth control pill. It broke her heart. She wept. But I knew what was right for me. I left the youth group because I didn't want to be in leadership. If I was doing things that I knew they thought were wrong, but I didn't think were wrong. And my boyfriend and I did have sex for the first time when I was 16 and a half years old with a condom, with birth control, and we got pregnant. And all I can say about it, as I've thought about what to tell you guys, is that I don't regret the decision to have sex, but I also didn't fully understand what the consequences could be. At that young age, I thought if I was on the pill, if I used a condom, there was no possible way, and I could control what happened to me. And what I learned is that we are not in control. And so I was really sick for 3 months and I didn't know why. And I went to the doctor and my GP said, "Could you be pregnant?" And I said, "Yes, please do the test. I've had sex one time and we use protection." But of course, they did the test. It was negative. I went to the hospital. I had blood drawn for testing of strange diseases. And then they called me and said, "You're pregnant and you only have 1 more week left in your first trimester. So if you're going to end this pregnancy, you have to do it by this weekend." And the floor just dropped out from underneath me because that's not the way I was raised. I was a good girl. I made good grades. I'm not the kind of girl that gets pregnant, but I was pregnant. And what does that do to my identity? What does that do to myself? Plus, with less than a week to decide. I said to my boyfriend, I told him what had happened. He wanted me to keep the baby. He wanted us to get married. He was 2 years older than me. I thought he was crazy. He was a precious, precious boy, but a boy, and I was a young girl. And I told my mom, "Please don't tell my grandmother because I don't want to break their hearts." And my grandmother called me the next day and said that I may know how I think she feels about abortion, but it may surprise her, and that her opinion may surprise me. And I said, "What do you mean, Mama?" And she said, "The minute that you conceive a child, you're a mother. And from the minute that you're a mother, you have to understand that your choices have to be based on what's best for your child. So if you want to have this child, then we will support you 100%. We'll be with you. You'll never have to do it alone. We'll be there for you. But if you don't think that bringing this child into the world is the best thing for the child, then you need to make the tough decision. And no matter what you decide, we will love you and we will support you. And I'll go with you to the clinic if you need me to." And so when I was 16 and a half years old, my mom and my grandmother took me to an abortion clinic in a state that it had only been legal in for a few years, and I had to drive 30 minutes to the next town. It was extremely traumatic. There were people with signs out front saying the same things that I used to say. It was difficult. There were a lot of laws. I had to receive information, wait a certain period of time, and go to another room. And I don't know what it's like today, but back then it was complicated in the mid-90s. And so in the back room, I was sitting with a bunch of young women, and we were asked if we were doing this of our own free will or if anyone was forcing us or pressuring us into this decision. And there was an older woman in the room in her early 40s. And she said, "Don't worry, girls. It doesn't hurt at all. This is my 5th time. And we went right out for lunch afterwards. You're going to be fine." And I almost got up and left because for me, it was the hardest decision of my life. And it was heavily weighing on me, even when I was moving forward with the decision. And for someone else, it was no different than a choice of what color shoes to wear. And it was really offensive to me and difficult that I thought, there's no difference between she and I. There's no difference between man and woman or Greek and Jew, as the Bible tells us, but we separate ourselves into these categories of good and bad, right and wrong, good girl and bad girl. And the whole experience just really broke down a lot of those binary classifications for me.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing and for helping us to begin to open a space where stories of all of who we are can be shared, because as a church, we're called to carry those things together. And I'm
And
thankful.
I pray that the church and the world may one day be safe enough that I could say this in my own pulpit without fear that someone would come up and ask me to leave. tell me that I couldn't be their pastor because I don't fulfill the moral expectation that they have. And I'll be honest and confess that that's a real fear for me. I published a book last year about a sexual assault that I witnessed, that I experienced in college. And right before it went to print, I called the publisher and was like, I don't think you should print it. I don't want everyone in the world to know I'm the pastor who got raped. And she said, if everyone in the world reads your book, both of us can retire now. And I was like, okay. So, everyone didn't read the book, but if anyone is listening to this and hearing something, there is someone who understands. Just because they wear a collar or a robe or have a certain way of speaking, you have no idea what people have been through. So just tell your story and trust that God is going to give you the sympathetic ear that you need to experience your own healing and to share that healing with others.
Amen. Thank you so much.
Friends, as we prepare our hearts for prayer, I have a new challenge for you. I want to invite you to recognize that wherever you are right now, on a couch, at a table, in your bed, on the bus, wherever you are right now, recognize that God has the ability to transform that into a holy place. If God can make earth and stardust into beautifully and fearfully and wonderfully made beings, then God can transform this space and this time into a holy space and into a holy time, one fit for our prayers. Let us pray. God, help us to open our hearts. Help us to open our hearts so that we might have courage to admit the things that are hard. To be honest about the areas where we're struggling, where we need help, where we know that we can't do it alone. Help us to open our hearts. Help us to open our hearts so that we can see beyond our own self-interest, so that we can see beyond the comings and goings of our own lives and recognize our siblings, our neighbors, our friends. We're all just trying to figure it out. Help us to see the people around us who are struggling, who need our help, our sympathy, our prayers, our love. God, we recognize that we are complex beings living complex lives. We ask that you give us the courage to discern what is right and what is good, knowing that the two might not always be the same. Help us and help others to respect all life, especially the lives of women who have been denied justice, their intelligence questioned, their choices limited, their freedoms denied. Inspire our minds, free our spirits, strengthen our wills that justice and compassion may always be our companions on this journey, and we may know your peace. And oh God, when our words fail and when our inspiration wanes, when our strength is not enough, let us find comfort in the prayer that Jesus taught his disciples, saying, Our Mother, Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Together we say, Amen. Obviously, this year has brought us so many things that have been unexpected, so many things that have been difficult, but it's also brought us as a community the opportunity to say thank you, to those who are able to give. I hope you know that we notice that it makes a difference, that we're grateful when you're able to financially support our ministries. And so we're in this moment of making plans for 2021. And so I wanted to give you a heads up. You're going to hear us talking a little bit more about giving, about tithing, about making a commitment to help support our ministries. As we're making these plans, it's exciting to plan out new opportunities for us to serve together, new opportunities to gather. We're looking forward to coming back together in person in 2021. We're inviting you to be a part of helping us to know what our capacity for ministry is, and if you're able to be with us and help to support. So I want you to know that it makes such a huge difference when you make the decision to tithe, when you're able to give. It makes a huge difference when you're able to give us $5 as often as you can. It helps us to continue to do ministry, to continue to make connections, invite new people. Our community has grown far beyond the Denver metro area, and we're so excited to continue this momentum. We're grateful that our church, that our work allows us to say to each and every person that you matter, that you are fearfully and wonderfully made, that you belong. And so thank you for all the ways in which you're able to support and engage this ministry. If you'd like to give, please go to belongchurch.org/give or text the number that you see below. Thank you.
Our scripture this morning is from the first chapter of Luke, verses 26 through 38. In the 6th month, the angel Gabriel was sent by God to a town in Galilee called Nazareth, to a virgin engaged to a man whose name was Joseph, of the house of David. The virgin's name was Mary, and he came to her and said, "Greetings, favored one, the Lord is with you." But she was much perplexed by his words and pondered what sort of greeting this might be. The angel said to her, "Do not be afraid, Mary, for you have found favor with God. And now you will conceive in your womb and bear a son, and you will name him Jesus. He will be great and will be called the Son of the Most High, and the Lord God will give to him the throne of his ancestor David. He will reign over the house of Jacob forever, and of his kingdom there will be no end." Mary said to the angel, "How can this be, since I am a virgin?" The angel said to her, "The Holy Spirit will come upon you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. Therefore, the child to be born will be holy. He will be called Son of God. And now your relative Elizabeth, in her old age, has also conceived a son. And this is the 6th month for her who was said to be barren, for nothing will be impossible with God." Then Mary said, "Here I am, the servant of the Lord. Let it be with me according to your word." Then the angel departed from her. Join me in prayer. Gracious and loving God, I pray that your presence will be felt among us this morning as we embark on a conversation that is not an easy one. God, we pray that the meditations of all of our hearts and the words of my mouth will be pleasing to you. In your name we pray. Amen. Sometime back in the winter of last year, Pastor Jasper and I were sitting around with a couple of people in between services when somehow we breached the topic of abortion. We talked about how we never talk about it and how it seems as though evangelical churches are the only ones in our country that speak to the issues of abortion through a faith lens, and that we as progressive Christians just opt out. And before jumping in, I want to acknowledge that we all come with different thoughts and feelings and emotions and experiences concerning this topic.
Some of us may feel very strongly on our opinions concerning reproductive health and are vocal about them. Some of us have strong opinions but choose not to share them. Some of us come with tension and confusion. Some of us come with avoidance. No matter where you are this morning, I welcome you and all that you bring to this conversation. I hope that you'll take the invitation to join in. I do think that choosing to stay silent on this issue, though, can bring about several unintended consequences that I don't believe we want. The first is that it limits what we are saying as a community we can carry together. Given that the data shows that 1 in 4 women will have an abortion before they're 45 years old, and I use the research language here, though we know that trans people and non-binary people also access abortion care. But that means that we're not creating space for folks to safely share part of their story when we choose to remain silent. And when we don't intentionally open up space for people who choose to get abortions, we might end up working to compound the shame that our society places on those who have had abortions. In this culture of silence, we are choosing to allow people to carry all the emotions and feelings about their experiences alone. My deep hope is that as we open this conversation up, we will begin to share some of that load together. We will be able to be the church for one another, even on the topic of abortion. Second, when we choose to stay silent as a community on the issue of abortion, we are complicit in allowing the voices of the privileged and the powerful to ring louder and louder. My second biggest hope is that we take this morning to begin to interrogate the story that the only moral good is a pro-life stance. Instead, I'd like us to explore the framework from which this comes. I'd like us to take a look at the roots of white supremacy and sexism that it has grown from, because this framework and the roots of the pro-life movement tell us that women, trans, and non-binary people aren't to be trusted with decisions about their bodies because apparently we aren't rational enough. It is a story that tells us that bodies of color are deemed less valuable than those of white bodies. It is a story that tells us the powerful and the privileged are the ones that create our ethics and our morality when it comes to reproductive health. But I believe this story is at odds with the gospel. I believe that our mandate from the gospel is to love one another compassionately, not to protect fetal life at all cost. I believe our gospel shares a story in which women are trusted. I believe our gospel calls us to live an ethic from the margins and not from the privileged and powerful. So I hope we can open our hearts to hearing a different story this morning. In our country, the religious right have been the ones to guide and set the conversation on abortion. Because of their patriarchal structure, this means that white men have set the conversation. This, of course, is not the voice of the most affected by this issue. And when we look at the history of the pro-life movement coming out of the evangelical church in the late 1970s, we can see that it was a strategic move for power and influence within the government. While popular belief will share that the religious right came out of a moral imperative tied to saving the lives of unborn babies, the history is a bit more hazy and a bit more racist than that. You see, Roe versus Wade, the Supreme Court case that legalized abortion in our country, was passed in 1973. However, it wasn't until 1979 that the religious right came out against abortion. Actually, in the years leading up to Roe versus Wade, the Southern Baptist Convention passed a resolution encouraging Southern Baptists to work for pro-choice legislation. After the ruling, one of the most famous fundamentalists of the 20th century was pleased and said, "I have always felt that it was only after a child was born and had a life separate from its mother that it became an individual person, and it has always, therefore, seemed to me that what is best for the mother in the future should be allowed." It's clear that the years directly before and after Roe versus Wade, the evangelical church did not oppose abortion. So why then do we hear that the religious right greatly strengthened and came out of this pro-life movement? In those same years, the same evangelical men were working on another issue that they were very adamantly against: school desegregation. After the ruling of Brown versus the Board of Education mandating desegregation of schools, there were many private Christian schools that had opened up as a means for many white Christian parents to send their children to schools that could remain segregated. However, the IRS eventually rescinded tax-exempt status from some of these schools. For many of the evangelical leaders, this was unacceptable. They blamed President Jimmy Carter for this, and these leaders were savvy enough to know that organizing grassroots evangelicals to defend racial discrimination would be a challenge and would need another rallying cry. Since the passing of Roe versus Wade and the increase in legal abortions, some Americans were becoming uneasy, and the evangelical leaders seized the opportunity to use abortion as a rallying cry for the religious right in order to gain more political power, in order to more effectively defend racial segregation in schools. They were simply seeking a stronger base for white supremacy legislation. This happened in 1979, a whole 6 years after Roe versus Wade. We can see the pro-life movement did not come from a deep moral desire to protect life, but instead as a way to bring more people on board with a political movement invested in maintaining segregation and white supremacy. And I believe that is why today we still see a lack of true pro-life agenda from the right. I believe that is why we see a lack of advocacy from the right to protect the lives of children in poverty, or working to advocate for mental health support for traumatized children, or children who have been put in cages and separated from their parents at the border, or children who spend their whole lives bouncing from one foster care situation to another. Instead, we see policy that is simply a means of political control. When the movement was originally a farce to gain political power to continue segregation, there is bound to be a dissonance between the movement and what we would deem truly pro-life, and is instead simply pro-fetal life. And women, trans people, and non-binary people's bodies have always been seen as an easy political tool for manipulation. And while the pro-life movement grew out of a racist-based political strategy, that isn't the only oppressive piece of its nature. It has gone on to become a tool for continued control and oppression of bodies. And out of this movement has come a perpetuation of mistrust of women and people with uteruses. Even when we err on the side of allowing some people to get abortions, only if society has deemed it justifiable, there is an underlying agreement that women and people with uteruses are not to be trusted to make moral decisions about their own bodies. This means the government, which we know to be predominantly run by white men, must know better and must therefore regulate the bodies of women and people with uteruses. When we don't give people full autonomy over their bodies, we are denying them their full citizenship and humanity. We are saying you are not to be trusted to make rational decisions, and we must therefore make some for you. And beyond individual choice, there exist the ways in which lack of abortion care and bodily autonomy disproportionately impacts certain groups of people. The history of the religious right and pro-life movement are not the only component of our history of abortion that is steeped in racism. We can look at the ways in which bodily control has been utilized by the government throughout our history. Last month, when we heard about the forced sterilizations happening at the ICE detention center in Georgia, I can imagine, like me, you were all disgusted and appalled that such a thing could happen. Immigrant women, according to a nurse working at the center, are being forced into sterilizations without consent. While this is a horrific act, it is not an anomaly. Sadly, it is a continuation of the American practice of forced sterilizations in our country on populations deemed undesirable. This practice can be linked back to acts committed by J. Marion Sims, the father of modern gynecology, who conducted experiments on enslaved black women without anesthesia and yet was held in the highest regard around our country. It can be linked to the eugenics movement in the early part of the 20th century, in which 32 states passed eugenic sterilization laws, and between 60 to 70,000 people were legally sterilized if they were deemed unfit to procreate, which of course included many minority, poor people, promiscuous women. A third of Puerto Rican women in the 1960s were sterilized. There was also rampant sterilization in the South targeted to black women. And before Roe versus Wade in 1973, there was a passage of another act in 1970 that resulted in the legal sterilization of 25% of Native American women throughout the 1970s. These are signature acts of genocide happening in our own backyard. And there is so much more that I can't touch on in this short amount of time that we have together. But what I can say is there is clearly something very unfaithful and very un-Christ-like underlying the system of reproductive health in our country. And it is so much bigger than just abortions. While we can see that it's the religious right led by white men that hold the power of the public conversation on this, I believe that as we recognize this unfaithful and un-Christ-like system at hand, we must do what God calls us to do, which is to turn and listen and center the voices of the most marginalized, the voices of those who are actually most deeply affected by the topic at hand, and in this case, in our country, that is women of color. When we choose to live into our call to lift up the voices of the most marginalized, we find that instead of simply talking about abortion, we expand the conversation into one of reproductive justice. And that in and of itself is a moral good that cannot be denied. In the 1990s, in Chicago, a group of Black women saw how the public conversation was being totally controlled by the religious right and decided to start a movement to change the narrative and conversation to one that reflected their lived reality. They did this because they recognized that the conversation had been set solely because of privilege and power, and that it had been set wrong. Out of that came the reproductive justice movement. These women chose to reshape the conversation and reclaim the space that belonged to them. The definition of reproductive justice that has stuck with me the most in my learning has been from an organization called Sister Song, which is the largest national multi-ethnic reproductive justice collective. Sister Song defines reproductive justice as the human right to maintain personal bodily autonomy, the right to have children, the right to not have children, and the right to parent the children we have in safe and sustainable communities. And this is biblically supported. I want to turn now back to our scripture from today. As you heard a little bit ago, our scripture is from Luke and is the story of the Annunciation. The angel Gabriel comes to Mary and tells Mary what is going to happen, not what has already happened. This is a story about a future conception, not a past one. This visit by the angel Gabriel offers an invitation to Mary to give her verbal consent before the conception of Jesus. Mary gives her verbal consent when she says, "Behold, I am the servant of the Lord. Let it be to me according to your will." When I read this story in my own theological imagination, I begin to wonder, were there other women that the angel Gabriel visited and said, "No, this isn't for me. It's too much"? God did not simply send the angel Gabriel to Mary and say, "You have conceived a child, you are pregnant." No, the angel said, "You are in God's favor, and this is what can happen in the future." And Mary gives her consent. This consent lifts up the importance of bodily autonomy, which is at the very heart of reproductive justice. Mary chose to allow the conception. She made a choice for her body. And in later verses, after Jesus has been conceived, she goes to her cousin Elizabeth's house. This too extends the story into one of a deeper story of reproductive justice, with bodily autonomy being the first pillar, having the healthy and safe environment to raise your children being the last. Mary's seeking that safe environment. Even though she's given consent, that doesn't mean she isn't scared. No matter a person's choice in having a child or not having a child, it can be emotional. It can be a time of happiness. It can be a time of fear. And Mary turns to her family to affirm her and love her. And so this story is one that holds up the importance of reproductive justice. The mere existence of Jesus comes out of a Jewish teenage girl's consent. I don't believe our call is to figure out when life begins or when personhood begins, or figure out what justification is moral and what isn't, but rather our call is to be compassionate, empathetic witnesses to one another, trusting one another to make decisions about our own bodies, and being there to support each other, no matter the decision. And I do believe that our call is to fight for justice against the violent and oppressive acts of racism and sexism that have plagued our country's history. And I believe that begins with fighting for bodily autonomy for all. The right to have children, to not have children, and to have the ability to raise the children we do have in safe and healthy environments. What would happen if instead of allowing our ethic on reproductive health to be mandated by people who are using that ethic for political power, but instead we actually centered the voices of the marginalized? And we listened to the people who are most deeply affected by their level of access to reproductive health. I believe we would have people who feel agency over their own lives. I believe we would have people who felt heard when they used their voices. I believe we would have education that allowed people to make informed decisions about their bodies. I believe we would move away from shaming people for their bodies, their choices, and their sexuality. I believe we would have parents who felt empowered to raise their children. I believe we would have less unintended pregnancies. I believe we would have more equality. I believe we would have more compassion and love for one another. How much closer would we be to the kingdom of God if we worked from an ethic of the margins instead of an ethic from the privileged? Amen.
God was never angry. God was not against me. God was never far away. God's not disappointed. God's not keeping score, and God's not judging my mistakes. God is light. God is love. Do not fear, for God's with us. God is good. God is grace. God will never hide her face. 'Cause God is. God is. God was never angry. God was not against me. God was never far away. God's not disappointed. God's not keeping score, and God's not judging my mistakes. God is light. God is love. Do not fear, for God's with us. God is good. God is grace. God will never
Friends, I want to say thank you for being with us. Thank you for being a part of conversations that challenge us all to think and to grow and to pray and to love more. I'm grateful for what we've just done, but I'm really excited about what comes next. Right after this, our community is getting a little bit bigger. We're inviting some folks into partnership with Belong, and we would love for you to be a part of that welcome. And that's something that we can't pre-record, we can't put together ahead of time. So we would love it if you would click the link that you've see in the comments that we're posting or that are in the notes for this post. We would love to see you, to connect, to perhaps you get a chance to see some faces you haven't seen in a while and help us to fully welcome new folks into our community. We are so grateful for every moment that we get to spend together and for all of the love and blessing that we get to share. Grace and peace.